At 10:48 p.m. on March 25, 2022, a young mother made a phone call that should have saved her life. Her voice steady, her words precise, her fear carefully contained. She told the emergency operator that her ex-boyfriend had broken into her home, that there was an active, apprehended violence order against him, that he had already come at her with a knife, and that she believed he might still be armed. This was not a panicked call filled with confusion. It was a woman clearly explaining danger, following the rules, trusting a system designed to protect her. What Mackenzie Anderson did not know was that this call would become her final recorded moments. That within 2 minutes her voice would be replaced by silence. Tonight on the Guilty Crime Stories, this is not a story told for shock value or entertainment. This is a story about accountability, about warnings that were voiced again and again, about legal protections that existed on paper but failed in reality. Mackenzie did everything she was told to do. She reported, she documented, she reached out for help, and she told the people around her with terrifying certainty exactly how her story would end. This case is not just about how a life was brutally taken, it is about how many opportunities there were to stop it, and how each one was missed. This is the story of Mackenzie Anderson, and the system that heard her fear, but did not act in time. Mackenzie Anderson was 21 years old, but the way people spoke about her made it feel like she carried a lifetime of energy inside her. She was known as Max to her friends, the one who laughed loud, danced without hesitation, and pulled people into moments they would remember long after the night ended. Her social media painted a picture of movement and light, sunsets along the Newcastle coastline, friends packed into cars, music playing too loud, smiles that looked effortless. But the center of her world was always her son. A 1-year-old boy she called her love bug and her caterpillar. Every plan she made, every change she tried to commit to, traced back to him. Mackenzie had lived a complicated life long before most people her age ever had to. She began struggling with methamphetamine addiction at just 16, a battle that followed her quietly into adulthood. Yet when she became a mother, something shifted inside her. People close to her say she wanted out of the chaos, out of survival mode. She wanted stability, safety, and a future that didn't feel borrowed or temporary. She talked about doing better. About being better, not in a performative way, but in the tired, honest way of someone who knows change is hard but necessary. From the outside, Mackenzie looked joyful, confident, alive. But behind closed doors, fear had begun to take up space in her life. Bruises that were hidden from public view, messages sent late at night asking for help, quiet confessions to friends that carried more truth than drama. She understood danger in a way most people never have to. She felt it approaching long before anyone else did, and she said it out loud. Mackenzie told people she believed her ex-partner would kill her, not in anger, not in exaggeration, but calmly, as if she were stating an outcome she could already see. What was taken from Mackenzie Anderson was not just her life. It was her chance to fully become the person she was fighting to be. The years she would have spent raising her son, the peace she was actively trying to build, and the future she believed was still within reach. Her story matters because she mattered, and because everything she lost should never be reduced to a statistic or a headline. Tyrone Thompson entered Mackenzie Anderson's life in late 2019, and at first he did not look like a threat. He was close to her age, familiar with struggle, and appeared to understand pain in a way that felt comforting to someone who had already lived through more than most. Thompson carried a deeply traumatic past, a childhood marked by instability, violence, and abuse that would later be used to explain his behavior but never excuse it. He had grown up with a violent, schizophrenic father, had been sexually abused by a teacher, and had lived in an environment where fear was constant and safety was rare. To someone like Mackenzie, who believed in empathy and second chances, this background may have looked like something she could understand rather than escape. But what initially felt like connection soon began to reveal itself as control. Thompson's affection came wrapped in intensity. His attention was constant, his presence overwhelming, and slowly, subtly, his care began to feel conditional. He wanted to know where Mackenzie was at all times, who she was with, what she was doing, and how long she would be gone. Concern quickly blurred into surveillance, and love started to sound like ownership. Friends would later describe his behavior as suffocating, isolating, and frighteningly possessive. Thompson did not simply want to be part of Mackenzie's life. He wanted to be at the center of it. And when he felt that control slipping, his behavior escalated. Early warning signs appeared almost immediately: verbal intimidation, emotional manipulation, and then physical violence. These were not isolated incidents. They formed a pattern, a cycle that repeated itself with increasing intensity. Thompson's mental state added another layer of danger. He began expressing bizarre and disturbing delusions, believing he was being poisoned by microplastics, that they were changing his body, that shadowy forces were controlling his life, including a government he believed was run by the Kardashians. These were not jokes or exaggerations. They were symptoms of a deeply unstable mind. And yet, forensic psychiatrists would later confirm that despite these beliefs, Thompson was not psychotic during his acts of violence. He knew what he was doing, and that awareness made his actions even more terrifying. Behind closed doors, Mackenzie was already living with fear. But like many victims of domestic violence, she tried to manage the danger quietly, hoping to de-escalate, hoping to survive, hoping that love, patience, or time might soften someone who was becoming increasingly unpredictable. Instead, Thompson's need for control tightened, and the relationship became something Mackenzie would later describe not as love, but as something she needed protection from. Long before the violence reached its peak, the warning signs were there, and they were screaming. By late 2021, the danger in Mackenzie Anderson's life was no longer something she could quietly manage or hide. The abuse she had been living with was escalating in both frequency and severity. Bruises began appearing on her body, painful evidence she shared with friends not for sympathy, but because she was trying to be believed. These were not accidents. They were not misunderstandings. They were the visible signs of a pattern of violence that had already crossed every line. Mackenzie began reaching out to domestic violence services, asking for help with security doors, cameras, and anything that might make her home safer. The emails she sent were calm, detailed, and desperate in their restraint. She explained her fear, she explained the threat, and she explained that she was trying to protect not just herself, but her child. She understood the gravity of her situation, even if the systems around her did not respond with the same urgency. During this time, Mackenzie said something to her friends that would later echo with devastating clarity. She told them she believed Tyrone Thompson would kill her. This was not said during a fight, not in a moment of heightened emotion, but plainly, almost matter-of-factly, as though she was stating a conclusion she had already reached. Her fear was not hypothetical. It was informed by lived experience, by violence she had already survived, and by a man whose behavior was becoming more erratic and dangerous by the day. In October 2021, Thompson was arrested and charged with assaulting Mackenzie, intimidating her, and damaging her property. Finally, the violence had entered the legal system. The court sentenced him to a maximum of 10 months in prison. And for the first time in a long while, Mackenzie could breathe. She obtained an apprehended violence order, a legal document meant to create distance and protection. It explicitly prohibited Thompson from contacting her or approaching her home. On paper, the system was finally doing what it promised. But paper cannot stop obsession, and it cannot restrain someone who has already shown complete disregard for boundaries. While Thompson was incarcerated, an appeal reduced his non-parole period from 5 months to just 4 months and 2 weeks. A decision made quietly, bureaucratically, and without any understanding of the danger waiting on the outside. This reduction would later be described as fatal, because prison had not rehabilitated Thompson. It had not cooled his fixation. It had intensified it. As his release approached, Mackenzie's fear returned in full force. She knew the AVO would not protect her. She had seen how easily rules meant nothing to him, and she felt time closing in around her. The warning signs were everywhere, documented, reported, repeated, yet each one was met with delay, dismissal, or inaction. Mackenzie was doing everything she was told to do, and still the system failed to see what she already knew, that her fear was not anxiety, it was prophecy. March 9, 2022 should have marked distance, accountability, and enforced protection. Instead, It marked the beginning of Mackenzie Anderson's final countdown. That was the day Tyrone Thompson walked out of prison after serving just over 4 months of a sentence meant to protect the woman he had already terrorized. The system treated his release like a routine administrative step, but for Mackenzie, it felt like a door being unlocked to something she had been desperately trying to keep out. Within hours of his release, Thompson violated both his parole conditions and the apprehended violence order. The same day he regained his freedom, he contacted Mackenzie. His message was chilling in its simplicity. He told her he loved her and that he was coming for her. It was not an apology, not an attempt at reconciliation. It was a declaration of ownership wrapped in affection. Mackenzie understood exactly what it meant. When she blocked him, Thompson did not stop. He created multiple social media accounts to reach her, cycling through profiles when each one was cut off. He contacted people connected to her new partner, fishing for information, mapping her movements, trying to reinsert himself into every corner of her life. This was not impulsive behavior. It was methodical, obsessive, and deliberate. The very next day, Thompson assaulted his own father, another clear act of violence, another unmistakable breach of parole. And yet, once again, the system failed to contain him. He was granted conditional bail, free to continue moving through the world despite mounting evidence that he posed an immediate danger. Over the following days, Thompson breached the apprehended violence order 8 separate times, 8 documented violations, 8 opportunities to intervene, 8 moments where the danger was confirmed beyond doubt, and still, nothing changed. Each breach was a warning siren, each one a chance to stop what was coming. But Thompson remained free, and Mackenzie remained exposed. During this period, Mackenzie was forced into an impossible position. To outsiders, it may have appeared that she was spending time with him voluntarily, but those closest to her understood the reality. She was managing a volatile man in the hope of surviving him, walking a tightrope between resistance and appeasement, trying to keep the peace long enough to protect herself and her son. The psychological terror was constant, the fear never fully lifted. She continued telling friends that she believed Thompson would kill her, even as she tried to navigate daily life, even as she complied with systems that kept telling her to document, report, and wait. Thompson's obsession deepened, fueled by rejection, by entitlement, and by a belief that rules did not apply to him. His fixation was no longer just emotional, it was strategic. Every message, every appearance, every breach brought him closer. And as March 25th approached, Mackenzie felt the weight of inevitability pressing in. The system had counted violations, but it had not counted fear, and it had not acted on certainty. Mackenzie was living in a state of constant psychological siege, waiting for something she knew was coming, and running out of time. March 25th, 2022 began like many other days in Mackenzie Anderson's life, but beneath the surface, tension was already building. That afternoon, Mackenzie, Tyrone Thompson, and a male friend gathered at her Crebot Street unit in Mayfield. Alcohol was shared, conversation drifted, and for a brief moment, the situation looked almost ordinary. But ordinary was something Mackenzie no longer trusted. Thompson's moods were unpredictable, and she remained alert to every shift in his tone, every change in his posture. It did not take much. After just 2 drinks, Thompson's demeanor began to change. His emotions surfaced quickly and intensely. He started telling Mackenzie how much he loved her, how she did not appreciate the things he did for her. Words that might sound affectionate to an outsider, but carried a familiar warning to someone who had lived through his violence. The room grew heavy, the air tight with discomfort. Mackenzie asked him to leave, a reasonable request, a clear boundary, but it only seemed to agitate him further. The tension escalated from emotional to physical in a way that felt deliberate. Thompson began moving around the kitchen, opening drawers, shifting objects, and then he pulled out a large knife and placed it on the counter, not hidden, not accidental, but positioned so everyone could see it. It was a silent message, a reminder of power, a signal of what he was capable of. Mackenzie felt the danger immediately. She sent a text message to her friend that cut through the moment with terrifying clarity. "Don't leave me alone with him." This was not drama. It was survival. Around 9:30 p.m., her friend managed to convince Thompson to leave the unit. He walked him toward the train station, hoping distance would calm the situation, hoping this would be the end of it. But Thompson had no intention of staying gone. After appearing to leave, he doubled back, climbed a ladder to reach Mackenzie's second-floor balcony, and broke into her home while she slept. Mackenzie woke to find him inside her bedroom, holding her phone, behaving as though he belonged there. The violation was total, the safety of her home shattered. Once again, her friend intervened and convinced Thompson to leave, and once again, it looked as though the immediate danger had passed, but Mackenzie knew better. At approximately 10:40 p.m., she realized Thompson was not going to stay away. Fear took over, but so did clarity. She called 000, Australia's emergency number, her voice steady despite the terror. She told the operator that her ex-boyfriend had broken in, that she had an apprehended violence order, that he had come at her with a knife, and that there were 2 knives earlier, but only one was accounted for. She explained the threat precisely, methodically. She was doing everything right, following procedure, asking for help. 8 minutes after that call, Mackenzie sent her final text message to her friend. "Thompson has returned." Those words marked the last moment of warning, the final confirmation that the danger she had been describing for months was now at her door. The tension that had been building all day snapped into something irreversible, and the final hours of Mackenzie Anderson's life closed in around her, not suddenly, not unexpectedly, but exactly as she had feared. The final attack on Mackenzie Anderson began at approximately 10:48 p.m., and it was over by 10:50. In those 2 minutes, Tyrone Thompson stabbed her 78 times using 2 kitchen knives. This was not chaotic or accidental. It was sustained, deliberate, and relentless. The force of the attack was so extreme that one of the knives snapped, the blade breaking away from the handle under the impact. Witnesses later described a scene marked not by shouting, but by silence. Thompson did not scream. He did not speak. He stood over Mackenzie and continued to stab her without saying a word. Neighbors, alerted by noise and instinct, called police. Some stepped outside, trying to understand what was happening. One witness looked through a gap in the block door and saw Thompson standing above her, repeatedly striking her body. Mackenzie tried to escape. She fought for her life. She moved toward the outside of the unit, desperate for air, for distance, for help, but she was trapped with a man who had already decided the outcome. When police arrived, they found Mackenzie lying outside her home. The broken knife handle was resting on her chest. Her body bore the evidence of extreme violence. Injuries to her head, neck, torso, and limbs. Wounds that showed she had been defending herself until the very end. Her 1-year-old son was present at the scene, covered in his mother's blood. Physically unharmed, but surrounded by devastation that would define the rest of his life. Paramedics and police attempted life-saving measures, but the injuries were catastrophic. Mackenzie Anderson was pronounced dead at the scene. Thompson was arrested immediately. He was bleeding from a hand injury sustained during the attack. When questioned by police, he showed no remorse, no shock, no visible awareness of the magnitude of what he had done. He told officers that he had stabbed her until she stopped, words that stripped the moment of any illusion of loss of control or passion. This was not rage without awareness. It was violence carried through to completion. The silence of those 2 minutes said more than any confession ever could. It marked the moment Mackenzie's fear became reality, and the moment the system's failures became irreversible. After the murder of Mackenzie Anderson, Tyrone Thompson entered a legal process that would stretch the grief of her family across years rather than offering any sense of closure. From the moment of his arrest, Thompson showed no remorse for what he had done. During police interviews, his words were flat, detached, and chilling in their clarity. He did not describe panic. He did not describe regret. He stated that he stabbed her until she stopped, reducing 78 acts of violence to a task completed. For nearly 3 years, Thompson maintained a plea of not guilty, claiming he had acted in self-defense, forcing Mackenzie's family to sit with uncertainty, to relive her final moments repeatedly, and to prepare for a trial that reopened wounds that never had time to heal. Just 1 week before proceedings were set to begin, Thompson changed his plea to guilty, a decision that spared the court a trial but did nothing to lessen the devastation. On May 2, 2025, he was sentenced to 22 years and 6 months in prison, with a non-parole period of 15 years and 6 months. The sentence landed like another blow. Mackenzie's mother, Tabitha Ackrit, described it as an insult to women globally, a punishment that failed to reflect the brutality of the crime or the warning signs that had been ignored. The Crown appealed the sentence, calling it manifestly inadequate. But in November 2025, that appeal was dismissed. Once again, the system closed ranks. Once again, accountability felt distant. The courtroom became a place not of justice, but of exhaustion, where a family grieving a young mother was left feeling that even after her death, Mackenzie had been failed. But Mackenzie Anderson's story did not end with a sentence handed down behind closed doors. In the aftermath of her death, her mother uncovered something that captured the cruelty of systemic failure in a single sentence. An email response from domestic violence services stating they were closing Mackenzie's request for support because she was now dead. Grief turned into resolve. Tabitha Ackrit launched a petition demanding change, one that gathered more than 30,000 signatures. And this time, the warnings could not be ignored. On November 18, 2025, New South Wales Parliament passed legislation establishing a 25-year standard non-parole period for the murder of a current or former intimate partner, the first law of its kind in Australian history. Mackenzie's name became part of that change. Her life, her fear, and her unanswered pleas transformed into something that might protect others. This law does not bring her back. It does not erase the failures that led to her death, but it stands as proof that her voice did not disappear. On the Guilty Crime Stories, we tell cases like Mackenzie Anderson's not to shock, but to remember, to recognize warning signs, to believe victims when they speak, and to understand that silence, delay, and inaction have consequences. Mackenzie knew what was coming, and her story asks us to make sure the next warning is not ignored.